are I really enjoyed Isaiah Rashad's album.
Oh, I absolutely love that project. Hey guys, and welcome back to Mixed Opinions. I'm your host, MixedByJocelin, and today we have a brilliant guest on. But before we get into that, I just want to give a big shout out to Audio Movers for sponsoring this episode. They're giving you guys 1 month free of their plugin, Listen To. All you have to do is hit the link below and use code Mixed Opinions at checkout, and you'll get 1 month free of their plugin, Listen To. Shout out to those guys. But today on the podcast, we've got Nicholas, aka $1 Million Snare, the bad boy mastering engineer himself. How you doing, bro?
Good. How you doing, Jocelyn?
I am good. I am very well, and I'm glad that we're locking in today and going to have this conversation. So.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
Man, thank you for coming. I mean, firstly, what a backdrop for everyone that's watching the video on this. Crazy looking studio. We're going to get into all the goodies behind you a bit later on in the episode, but that is looking sweet. Yeah, oh, it's on the t-shirt as well. That's crazy. I didn't even clock that. That's so cool. Mate, one day I hope to have.
Dude, if you look on the screen, there's another studio. No, I'm just kidding.
There's a guy sitting in a chair with a t-shirt with the studio on, just going on and on and on.
Yeah.
One day I hope to have a studio cool enough to print on a t-shirt, man. 100%.
Thanks, man.
So just to get into the episode and to warm everyone up, I'd love it if you would introduce yourself and tell everyone that is watching that maybe doesn't know a bit about yourself and how you got into the industry and like became the top mastering engineer that you are today.
Well, my name is Nicholas De Porcel, aka Depp. I am the owner and founder of $1 Million Snare Mastering. I have been doing music for a very long time. I started making beats when I was about 12 years old. These headphones are kind of weird on me. I might do a straddle. There we go. I can't hear myself.
It looks cool. It's like the Britney Spears vibe. It's cool.
Yeah. I got exactly. Yeah. I'll do some choreography at the end. I got into. So when I was around 12, my friends started rapping, and I was like, well, I don't know if like I'm gonna fit into that dynamic of rapping because you hear my voice, right? Like I wouldn't have been a great rapper, but I did find my niche in starting to make beats, and so I was like, when they all started rapping, I started to make beats.
Okay,
and I started really getting into production. I downloaded one of the very first programs I had was Fruity Loops. Like,
I was going to ask
like
you,
FL Studio.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, was it
whatever.
Fruity Loops? Like that seems to be the DA that everyone starts on when they're like if they're making beats and stuff like that. And it did.
Yeah, it was
for all the new guys on there. It did used to be called Fruity Loops before it was FL back in the day.
Yeah, and it was. There was no version number because it was the only one. And so it was Fruity Loops. It was version 1 now, you know.
Yeah.
And when I got on there, I started like to open up the demo songs. And there was this one, like, it was a Timbaland and like a Leah song that they had like recreated with like the TB303 or whatever.
Oh,
and I was like, I was like, whoa, like it like blew my mind. So I'd grown up around music, you know, pretty much my whole life. Like my grandpa was always in the church choir, and my other grandpa had done. He was like he went to one of the very first electronic music conferences in the 70s in Australia, and so he'd always been into like, you know, digital music, and he's from Bolivia, so his style was more like, you know, localized to like South America.
Okay,
and so
right.
Between these two, like, you know, they raised my parents, and my dad always used to play guitar and sing to us. And so like I understood, you know, how like instruments were played, how that stuff happened. But then when I saw those demos inside FL Studio, it made me realize like how much more there was to music production than just playing notes, on, you know,
Yeah, the freedom
an
of it, of
instrument.
being able to just like sequence whatever and have it all in one place.
Yeah. And so I got really into not only like playing piano around that time, but like seeing what I could do to alter the instrumentation, how I could change and manipulate the instruments. Um, that eventually led to me doing electronic music, and I got really into sound design, and with that I got really into mixing
Yeah.
my productions. And so I was mixing a lot, and like the mixes were great. Like I understood how I wanted them to sound, and they always came out how I wanted them to sound. And I was working like a very low wage job at that time. And so I would save up all my money and I would send them out to mastering. Cause like for me, mastering was always
Okay.
like, oh, it's this like, you know, you remember how it's described, like a black box.
Yeah.
Nobody knows anything
Yeah,
about
we
it. It's so
used to say it was
secretive.
like black magic. Do you know what I mean? Like, no, the secrets are so well kept, and there's no information out there about it.
Exactly. And so I would like try to master my own mixes, and they would not be up to par with everything else. But then I would send my stuff to mastering, and it would be not up to par with everything else I was listening to.
Right.
And not up to par, or like it might be close, but they would do things to my mix that like I wasn't, you know, like really a fan of. And
Okay.
um so I'd be like, I rarely, if ever, had contact with the actual mastering engineer who was mastering my stuff. It was always like the secretary or someone else.
I see.
And so I would be spending my whole paycheck and not getting back what I liked. And so I was like, you know what, well, maybe I should start like buying up gear and like getting into mastering. And that's how it happened for me. I
Right.
started like building my own mastering studio, buying up gear,
And how long
building
ago was
a
this?
room. This was like 2015, like 2014.
Okay, right.
Yep.
Okay. And when you were sending the masters, before you started like investing in it yourself and trying to learn the craft yourself, when you were sending your mixes, how were you sending them over? Like, was it like a straight stereo bus, or were you doing like stem
Yeah, just a
outs?
stereo wave.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Stereo wave. There was like, you know, I sent with like a bit of headroom, and I mixed like relatively like my mixes were great. I could still go back and reference those mixes, and like they sound incredible in this room. I've, you know, been in a couple different rooms since, and like in this room, which is like, I think this is like one of my final forms. You know? This is my final form.
Yeah.
It sounds like accurate. I bring those same mixes in, and from that long ago, and they sound amazing in here.
And I take
actually
it
have those like,
you can finally get those mixes exactly how you want them to sound. You know what I mean? After going through trial and trial.
But now, but now the songs are like 10 years old.
Right. I'd like to hear them though.
So,
are they out in like the public? Can anyone go and check them out?
No, they're not. I'm like a Dr. Dre type. I work on things for 20 years and tell everyone about it, and then
just lives on the hard drive.
Yep.
Right. But well, you're finishing everyone else's music though.
He is my one of my biggest influences. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Dre. Yeah.
So I've been waiting for the Detox to drop since.
Oh, mate, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started. We've had an entirely different album since then. But it was a great album, and it was definitely worth the wait for him. I really enjoyed that album, to be honest. Was it is that Compton? Is that what it was called?
Compton, after the movie.
Yeah, and that was like the introduction to Anderson .Paak. That was like my first introduction to Anderson .Paak, and that was awesome.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, amazing. That's brilliant. That's such a cool story. So it's sort of it came out of necessity for yourself then, basically. Like you really wanted to improve your own sound and your own ability, and rather than shifting the task onto someone else, they weren't achieving what you wanted. You took it upon yourself to start investing and learning the craft yourself.
Yeah, and like to their credit as well, like it does take time. And so when I started like mastering for other people, I was actually hanging around this studio with my friend Circuit, who you've had on this podcast as well.
Brilliant guy, brilliant guy.
Yeah, he's and still is like continues to evolve his sound. And I was hanging around a studio where he was mixing out of a lot, and he would ask me like, "Hey, can you master this?" And I'm, like I'm mastering my own stuff. I was like, "Yeah, sure. Like I'll try it out." And so I started to like get more and more practice doing other people's mixes.
Yeah.
And then it got to a point for me where I was like, "Hey, can you master this?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't really have time to do it. Like I need, to be paid for it." Cause I was doing this stuff for free when I first started, when I really first started out. And so that's when I started to get a little bit of demand for my time and my product. That's when I was able to say like, yeah, I could do it for this price,
Yeah, of course.
And so I started charging for it. And along the way, one of my other friends needed mastering done, Cyrus, who was working with Mixed by Ali at the time. And he like sent me something to master, and it like slowly, like those things started happening for me where I would get opportunities. I would get these opportunities, and it was either like I was going to get it or not. And sometimes, like in the beginning of my career, they would send it to like, and I didn't even know this was a thing, where they would send it to like three or four different mastering engineers, and then they would like choose the one that they liked best. And there were times in those shootouts when like early on when I would lose, and be like, damn, like how did I, like what happened, why did they like that one and not mine? And then I would like go back and listen to whatever came out, and I started understanding more of like what people actually wanted. And it was through those things, like all the jobs that I lost, that it was either like, oh, this isn't for me, I'm never going to do this, or it's like, all right, how do I get there? And every single one of those steps was like led me to like, all right, well, I need to start working like they're sending this to all the best people in the world. And that's what I literally did. I was like, all right, I do a version of a song, and this is how I work today.
That's
like
an amazing way to work. 100%. That's an amazing way of working.
Yeah, and I listen to it, and I'm like, all right, can I improve it? Like, can I beat myself?
Yeah.
And so I'll beat myself. Like, I'll try to beat my own work like 3 or 4 times every song, and then that's what gets sent to the client.
Right. Okay. So it's like because a lot of people, I have this kind of topic comes up quite a lot actually on the show, and it always surprises me because it's about I'm talking to these like top level professional engineers, and they're like multi-platinum award winning records, all this stuff, and they always say it's like, oh, it is such a kick when I might not win a mix, or they go with someone else, or they don't, they choose not to work with me. And I'm like, that's crazy. And it's actually nice to sort of hear that back, to know that at any level, it's still competitive. But your outlook on it is like, rather than like letting it get you down, you're using it as a drive to push you to continuously get better.
Yeah, it's a stepping stone. Like all of those things, like just by getting the opportunity is huge for me. Like I haven't seen in mastering, especially, like I haven't seen many people come into it without sitting behind a big engineer for 20 years waiting for them to retire. And so for me, it was like, I can't wait that long. And I'm not going to wait that long. And especially like with the stuff that I was getting sent back from those people who had developed their ear over, 20, 30 years. I knew that I was like, why not? Why couldn't I do this? So
yes, it's interesting you say that about having to sit behind someone for like 20 years, right? Because it feels like it was like that as well as a mix engineer, and for some parts of the industry, it still is kind of like that. But there's a lot more I call them like DIY engineers that have come up and just learned the necessity for themselves, just like what you just like yourself. But it never really occurred to me, and that the same process is developing and happening with mastering, which it clearly is. You're living proof of that. Do you know what I mean? Which that's so cool, and it's like refreshing to see that again, such a part of the industry that has so much sort of like cover to it and mystery that is like being unlocked in a way, in an untraditional way and a more modern way. Do you know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think people have like kind of seen what's happening and gravitated to it. Like, we're not trying to preserve a classic sound. That's the whole $1 million snare creed. Like, we're not trying to preserve a classic sound. That's not us. Like, if you want to go sound like the 70s, go somewhere that's been around since the 70s. And that's great. Like, I love those places because sometimes that's the sound I want to hear too when I'm listening to music in the car. You know, I enjoy other people's work. But here we're building EVs. We're trying to be the Tesla of mastering. Like, we don't cut lacquers. We don't do anything to tape. Like, we can deliver files for you to like get them printed and pressed other places, right? But that's not our focus. Our focus is like where music lives today, where music is being broken today, on social media. You know, we're paying attention to these different specs that all these the DSPs require for delivery. Like, we're trying to deliver an optimized sound, and so that's kind of like what we are. We're not trying to be like.
You'll have to take you as a mastering engineer, and I mean, again, for the audience that doesn't quite know, but like and I'm sort of not massively clued up on it as well, but there's different like codexes for different streaming services and like YouTube and Instagram and stuff like that. Is that something that you guys like actively take into your workflow when like working on masters, and to make sure that they sound like brilliant on all of those things?
Heavily. And it's I don't know, I don't want to say it's not a compromise, but like there are decisions that have to be made to where it's like, okay, this is going to sound one way on here and one way on here, and what's the best way to get it to sound as good as we can between those two places, right? So it sounds
so
similar.
A little bit left on one side, and you know, pulling back other things here for it to work there, right?
Yeah, and it's a different layer of complexity than, well, it's like we've removed some layers of complexity in mastering over the years because now we're veering away from physical, right? So like we don't have to worry about tape or wax or any of that stuff.
Delivering multiple versions and things of it.
But we have an additional layer of complexity where we used to master so that it translated across multiple playback systems, where it's like, all right, it should sound great on the headphones and on the speakers and in the car and in the house, right? But now the additional layer of complexity is like, all right, it has to sound great on the speakers, the headphones, the car, and Spotify and Tidal, and it also has to sound good on Instagram stories, and it has to sound good on the TikTok when it gets uploaded to TikTok. So it is a little bit more.
Would you say there's like
complex.
A big difference between those? And I am right in saying it's like the codecs, right, of like the different platforms. That's what changes the sound.
Yep.
So
because when we deliver a file,
please.
When we deliver a file, it gets transcoded to whatever format that they're using. For instance, like we deliver a wave for upload, and Spotify intakes it as OGG Vorbis, and Apple Music intakes it as ALAC, and Tidal intakes it and they convert it to FLAC. So each time it's encoded to these different formats, something is happening under the hood. And some of those are more intrusive and invasive, like OGG Vorbis from Spotify, than a FLAC from Tidal.
Yeah, because that's sort of like, so that sort of explains it to people. Like that's the the known fact anyway, that Tidal, you get what people say is like a truer version of the master and the sound than what you would get on Spotify, because Spotify are concentrating more on like trying to create more of a seamless listening experience. So they're gonna be changing like the sound slightly.
And they're trying to maximize their profits, and storing
Yes, of course.
files,
Yeah.
storing data is a huge cost. And if you could reduce your storage by 10%, because every other file is 10 times bigger, then you're reducing a huge cost in your operation. So I would say Spotify is very much geared toward their shareholders and less the consumer and the actual artist.
Is there like is there a software that you guys use that can I'm sure I've heard of something, but like that emulate the different codexes, so you can sort of like hear roughly how they sound?
Demetrius and Kayla use one software. I always forget the name. I actually just like the stock encoder in Sequoia, because we work in Magic Sequoia. So we have a little thing that you could put on and I actually like my thing because it's lower quality than the one that they use. And so I'm like trying to hear what it's like when it goes to like real low quality.
I see. Yeah.
So I'll kind of audition it and dial it in to where I think is the sweet spot. Sometimes I'll totally ignore it and I'll be like, okay, I don't care what it's going to sound like on Spotify free. Like this needs to be like this. And sometimes the client asks for me to kind of like go out of bounds, and like there's no rules, so we're delivering what the client wants. And we kind of go out of bounds.
Yeah, but there is like a balance to it, surely, because you are you hold all the information. Like the client's hiring you, the client might not necessarily know all the ins and outs of like, oh, it's actually going to sound different here than here. So when you deliver it to them, and there's a bit of education that needs to be laid out to say like, oh, we have to make it kind of run like this, because to make it seamless on all these different platforms as best as possible. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and that's the first pass that they get. And if they ask me to do anything additionally to get it to where they want it, and it's all everything requires some sort of context too. Like there was one, for instance, just yesterday, I had a mixer hit me up and say, hey, the artist wants to turn this master up. Like, can we do it? And I was like, yeah, easily. Like that's one of the easiest things to do is like turn things up or down. It's ironic to say, but like, yeah, we can easily do that. And he clued me into like, all right, this EP isn't going to be released as a 5-song EP. It's actually, this one song that you did is actually coming out with another single that the mixer had mastered.
Oh, I see.
And so I listened to the single and I was like, okay, I see, what he did. And like spec wise, yeah, it was out of bounds. Like it's going to sound distorted. Like when it gets uploaded to Spotify, it's going to sound distorted when it gets uploaded to.
You'll have to bring the rest of the project up to that level, surely. So it sounds like.
Well, I only had to do that one song because the other 4 are going to be on their own project.
Okay.
But he requested this one song because it's dropping with this other single. So it's like a 2-single thing. And so I turned it up, but I did my best to keep it in spec for like, all right, it's going to be super loud, but it's also not going to sound any different once it gets uploaded. Because that's mostly what I'm concerned with.
Yeah, you don't want it to change.
I don't want the client to hear it, approve it, then it gets uploaded to Spotify and it sounds different. Yeah. Lower, I'm okay with it sounding lower because users have normalization checked, but I don't want it to sound different. I want the balance to be retained. I want the dynamic range to be relatively retained. You know?
For those that don't know who they're listening to the episode, when he says normalization check, there's a setting within Spotify and you can actually turn it off and on, toggle it. So it's like you can listen to your music where at the volume that it's been pressed at, basically. But they do a great job with the normalization.
on Spotify. It's probably my favorite normalization setting of any DSP, even though the quality's low.
Yeah.
Because when you're playing a playlist, things do sound relatively the
Smooth.
same.
Yeah,
Like,
smooth.
it's
Yeah.
good for.
It's true. I have it. I always turn it off because obviously, as an engineer, I want to hear. I want to try and listen to it as much as the engineer intended it to as possible. But like, obviously, you can't. You know, you still have the codecs that runs through it and all that stuff. So that's super interesting. There's another point that I sort of wanted to bring up and use this as opportunity for the guys that are listening, because I feel like a topic online that gets sort of like mistreated and a lot of like different information gets thrown around the place is like how people are printing and what volume like LUFS people are pushing their records out and printing their records to. Because it felt like a couple of years ago everyone was like, it has to be -14 and now like everyone's saying no, you don't have to do that, XYZ. You know, what's your take on like what level you should be sort of like printing at?
On gearspace.com, there in the mastering forums, there is a stickied post at the very top of the forum, and it says mastering levels, why to not master to these levels that the DSPs tell you. And it is very thorough, and it has a great breakdown of why I would recommend, like, if you are trying to figure it out, to read that post. Like if you're like really trying to get into mastering, go on to gearspace.com. In the mastering forums, it's one of the top stickied posts on there, and it explains it's going to explain it a lot better than I am going to on this podcast. But the long story short is those specs that DSPs require, first of all, are not uniform. So every company has a different spec, and over time, those specs change. So if you've ever dealt with having a moving target, like there's no point in trying to hit this moving target. What we want to be able to do is create a file that doesn't eventually have to get remastered by someone else.
Yeah.
So, and to do that, we want to maximize the format in which we are delivering, which is wave. So if I can maximize amplitude, pan, frequency of the wave, which are like the three big specs of that wave, then I'll be able to create a master that lives a very long time and can live through any time period and live through any, moving target that a DSP sets in place.
Okay, cool. I like that. I like that. And you said Gearspace or Gearspecs?
Gearspace.com.
Gearspace.com.
Formerly known as Gearsluts.
Okay, cool. Oh, yes, I know the site. Yeah. So you can, so check that out if you do want some more information. But it's a topic that comes up all the time for me when, because I do like a mentoring course, and I'm constantly saying, I personally don't listen to what they're asking me to. I'm get it to a level that I think sounds good and sounds nice and can compete, and that's what I'm aiming for. Do you know what I mean? When I'm doing my masters, not that I'm by any means, I'm definitely a mix engineer, not a mastering engineer, but as the game works, people want both sometimes. So,
everything's it's all like a compromise too. It's like, do I want to push it louder and surface some of these maybe not very musical artifacts? Do they like add into the record, or do I want to like pull back a little bit and like have some of these things kind of be masked, as well as like if you're doing an album? And one thing about Magic Sequoia is I can quickly highlight the files after they've been exported for an entire album. And you can see this on my TikTok too. And it'll quickly output the average loudness for each file.
Oh, really?
The momentary max for each file, and then the short-term loudness, which is like the 10 seconds, the loudest 10 seconds of each file. And so I'll be able to look at them back to back, like in a very quick glance, and let dive deeper into the story. So sometimes there'll be 2 songs back to back, number 9 going into number 10, that there's a disparity of average loudness of 2 LUFs, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't look good. Like,
Yeah.
let me go revisit that before delivering this, and I'll play them back to back, and perceivably they sound exactly the same, because loudness isn't based on just mastering; it's based on heavily on arrangement and production.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there can be there can be so much going on in a record, and how that's been produced, it can sound quieter than something that's like totally stripped back, just because of like how it's been laid and the arrangement and stuff like that. So yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
110%. So yeah, basically, like, numbers are important, but to pay attention, don't live like finally by the number. Do you know what I mean? Like
I try to look at the numbers last.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the last thing I do. I'm using my ears, and then I go into the numbers, and I'm like, okay, like, and I use them to help me make decisions faster. That's kind of the point of them. Is like,
yeah, I see. Yeah, so you see that -2 laughs difference, and you will be like, okay, let me just quickly check it, make sure that there's no noticeable difference. There's not. Okay, it's fine. Keep running. Do you know what I mean? That's
exactly. Yeah, and it's usually like a track with like heavy drums and bass in the track, and then going into a track that's mostly acoustic with no drums. Like, and it sounds the same, because in the other track with all the drums and everything else, the acoustic intro and the vocals and where everything sits sound exactly the same. They just don't have that energy that's adding into that
being generated
kind of,
by all of the drums and stuff. Yeah.
Okay,
that's cool. So going into like more like what projects that you've worked on over the last few years, you've worked on some of the biggest hip hop records to come out, like with artists such as Baby Keem, Roddy Rich, like absolute giants in the industry. And some of my personal favorite records that I've been listening to as well, especially the Baby Keem album. That was awesome. What is there any like standout projects for you, like over the last couple of years, that you like, that has been a moment in my career and I'll never forget it, sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I try to treat like every project like the big projects. So even if you're an independent artist, like, you're getting the same, like, I'm doing 3 or 4 different masters to compete with myself, before you get it back.
Yeah.
But some things that I've really enjoyed I really enjoyed Isaiah Rashad's album.
Oh, I absolutely love that project. I loved his first
It's still
EP.
one that I listen to.
Yeah, and yeah, his like how he's evolved as an artist through the last few projects is so dope. I love that album so much.
Yeah, that The House is Burning. It was a really special album. James Hunt brought that to me, and super grateful for James as well. He's just an amazing guy, an amazing person to work with, as well as like one of the most talented engineers on the planet. But he brought that to me, and that's where I actually met Rory at TDE too. He's a great engineer, probably one of the best around as well. But there's something about that project that just like, it has a replay value for me, and there's not a lot of stuff, because when I'm working every day on like 4 to 8 songs or whatever, there's not a lot that I can go back and revisit.
Yeah,
and
of course.
That's one album that I actually go back to and revisit, and I listen to it, and I like it, and I enjoy it, and it sounds great. Like, every time I play my own work, it's hard for me to not get critical.
Yeah, of course, because you spent so much time being critical on the record and trying to sort of like improve it and hearing the depth of it and doing whatever you can to sort of like enhance it. Then going back to it as a consumer must be like a difficult position to be in, just to enjoy the music for what it is, because you're constantly going to be analyzing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you find yourself doing that with other people's music as well? Like, or are you able just to switch off the engineer brain?
Oh no, I can't. There's some albums that I used to listen to too, when I was younger that I can't listen to anymore, that
Right.
have been ruined by my own ear. And I know it's really difficult sometimes because I think, like, there's a reason why we do the things that we do, and we like make a living doing the things that we do. It's
Yeah.
like it's something that I can't turn off.
Yeah.
I listen everywhere I go. Like, my ears are always on, and I've gone deep philosophically about, like, thinking about my senses as a human being. Like, we have
Right.
these different modalities, and we have, like, hearing is one thing you can't switch off unless you go to sleep.
No.
I'll be sitting in a restaurant, and everyone else will be having a conversation, and all I'll be able to hear is like the hum from that light up there. And I'll be like, "Do you guys hear? Do you hear that hum?" And people will be like, "What are you talking about?" And then
Yeah.
my wife will be like, "Oh yeah, now I can hear. Now that you pointed it out."
Yeah. Totally.
Um,
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
so when I listen back to an old album I used to listen to, and I hear the distortion in the vocals at 31 seconds where the kick plays, I'm like, I like, every single time I'm like,
Yeah. That's
like,
irritating you.
it's hard
Yeah.
to so
I find myself with the same problem, to be fair. Like, my friends will speak to me and be like, "Oh, have you listened to this album? Have you listened to this album?" Da, 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 da. And I'm like, to be honest with you, because I spend all day listening to music and mixing music, the last thing I want to do when I'm out of the studio is like continue to listen to music. Like, I turn on a podcast, an audiobook, and then when a project comes out that I'm genuinely interested in, I'll come into my studio and listen to it like in a proper situation. Like, I don't really, unless I'm in the gym, I don't find listening to music just like that enjoyable anymore, which is such a weird thing for an engineer to say, because I absolutely love music, but it's just part, I think it's just part of how it's become for me, like, as an engineer.
I find it enjoyable. Just, I've conditioned myself to such an audiophile setting, that when I'm outside of this setting, like outside of an audiophile setting,
Yeah.
it's like it's hard unless I go the complete opposite. Because some of those old albums I can listen to on a little like a Google speaker, like
Yeah.
while I'm cleaning.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
put on some of those albums while I'm cleaning, like in my house, and I'll be able to just like listen to the music,
Yeah. Yeah. That's like
because
background
all the
stuff.
details are masked.
Yeah, yeah. It's coming out of this tiny speaker, so it's all good. That's cool, man. I like that, and I really find it cool that you chose that as
Isaiah Rashad.
yeah. His music, especially his early stuff, TDE as a whole, was like such a big part of my, like, as growing up and becoming a man. Like, all of that music, Schoolboy Q, Kendrick Lamar, J Rock, all of those guys, like, I was just constantly taking in and trying to learn. Like, Ali is like one of my inspirations. Like you said, Dre's one of yours. Like, I spent years trying to figure out how he mixes and what he does and stuff. So, like, I find that really cool. He wasn't.
Yeah, he has one of the best, if not the best, ear I've
Yeah, and his process is so cool
with.
as well. Like, the way that he mixes, and his outlook on music, and his outlook on as well as business as well. Like, he's a brilliant guy. That was actually, I saw you at the engineers booth last year at NAMM. You did.
I'll be there this year too.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to make it, which is so annoying. But I'll definitely be there the year after. But that's cool. So there you go. If you're heading over to NAMM, make sure you hang around the engineers tent, and you can hear from the master himself. That'd be dope. That was a really cool panel. Actually, I found that super interesting. That whole conversation. To be fair. That was a dope chat. That whole weekend was just filled with such brilliant engineers, though. Like, it was engineers. I spent like near enough 90% of my time there just at that tent, to be fair.
That's where I would spend my time too. If I were coming into it, I'd be at engineers every day.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, it was awesome.
Because they're the new school. I would be hanging around there. That's where all the new school people are at.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I feel like they just even the sort of like hiring Devon and Elgene to sort of like do the background talk and the introductions and stuff, like that was like, it was just done very well, and it's like felt like it was connected to the, as you say, like the new school, the new guys, everyone coming up. Like it was, you know, some of the other tents, not naming any names, but it can feel a bit stagnant sometimes and doesn't have any soul to it, but you can feel the soul of that company. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we have a lot of energy.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah, especially Ali. He has enough energy for everyone. Do you know what I mean? When he comes on, so he fills the room. But yes, that was awesome, and it's a shame I can't be there this year to come and say hi to you in person. Another one that I like to talk about, and I'm quite interested in this, and you know, some people don't feel comfortable naming stories or whatever, but I'll ask the question anyway. But as an engineer, obviously, a massive part of our jobs is like problem solving, fixing issues. Like that's mostly what we do. I'd love to know if you've got any like studio fails, like something that happened, an issue that happened that was like, oh my God, and like you learned a massive lesson from it.
I mean, as engineers, like I'm very into, we have kind of control of the environment. So when something does fail or when something happens, that's kind of why people pay us, you know? So, I think I used to get worried about, and so it still can stress me out. Like when I have a piece of gear that fails or something that's like, you know, something that's fixable, that'll take me down for like momentarily. Yeah. But all that stuff, it's like, yeah, we're engineers. Like I'm going to open up that brain unit behind me. I'm going to solder whatever I need to solder to like get it working correctly again. And so those types of problems, that's like what we're kind of paid to do and paid to know. As far as like fails in projects, there was one time, I won't name the album, but
no, that's fine.
I was delivering this album, and we were already like, the deadline was already crazy. Like we're gonna go up until like 2 hours before the project comes out, like that type of deadline.
Crazy.
Like, so the project was already like shaping up to be just one of the most stressful projects ever. And I am sitting in the studio, I'm getting like some of the final mixes from the mixers, and the power goes out to the whole studio.
Oh man.
And I'm like, all right, well, I wonder how long this is going to last. This was a few years back. And so what ended up happening was, like, fortunately the power came back on, but as an engineer, I need to think of contingencies and like ways to mitigate that type of thing. And immediately, like after the project was turned in, I got solar and batteries to back up the studio.
That's literally what I was going to say. I can imagine your brain thinking straight away, okay, I'm going to get some generators and like make sure this never happens again.
So that was what I learned early on in like client relations, is like when I had pieces of gear failing, it's not, I can't just tell clients like, hey, you remember that delivery date? I said Friday. Well, it's actually going to be Saturday. I could, but is that like any way to run a reliable business?
Course not. Yeah,
right?
Of course not.
And so what I started doing early on is I like the gear that I have, the analog stuff that I have. And instead of like buying up, 10 other different machines, what I started to do was like get backups of each thing that I had. So I have, for most of my setup, I have either a second one or I have backup parts of like the high failure parts.
Oh, right.
And so anytime something goes down, it's like, okay, well, we'll fix it, but like for the meantime, like let's put the other one in.
A, B, bang.
Yep.
Done. That's
crazy.
That speaks serious levels of your like dedication and how much you care about the product and your business. Do you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah, I
feel like
care about my word.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, your integrity as an engineer. Do you know what I mean? And I don't feel like people could speak up to that level that you're obviously dealing on there. Like that's serious integrity. Like to be like I'm so dedicated to making sure that these projects come at the time that I've said. I've spent thousands and thousands of pounds on being able just to switch out any of my gear on the fly. Like that's so impressive and definitely something to look up to 100%. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. I don't even think I need to be congratulated for it. I think that's like how it should be, you know.
Well,
But yeah,
clearly,
obviously
but
it is a
that's
luxury.
yeah, but that I don't feel like that's not how most people would run their studios. I don't think so anyway. Like unless you're getting like massive commercial studios like Abbey Road or something like that, where obviously they've got like rooms just stacked with like gear from like decades and decades and decades of running the
Yeah,
space.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They've got a guy dedicated just to upholding the mics, and he has this legendary book of mics. Do you know what I mean? But that I think
Yep,
that's
I
so,
do know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah. I just think that's so impressive. Another question I wanted to speak to you about is and you know, I'd be interested to hear what your opinion is of it, because obviously as a mix engineer, we sort of like all know what the challenges are, but what sort of like that what are the challenges that you might come across day to day, like as a mastering engineer? What are this kind of speed bumps that would hold you back and that you have to sort of like navigate around as a mastering engineer that can get in the way of like getting the project clean and done?
These days, not really much except for getting paid.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why, you know, I like to use engineers, because
I was about
engineers
to
is a
say shout
platform.
out to engineers. Like they're solving the
Yeah,
problem.
it's a platform where people can book me on, and they get, you know, they get the files back. They can audition it multiple times, and I get paid straight away upon approval.
Yeah.
That's been great. I have a studio manager, Ryan, who you may have seen at NAMM last year as
Yeah.
well, and his primary focus day to day is like hitting people up for unpaid
Invoices.
stuff. Yeah, and it's like mostly major record labels where we have to do this level of follow up. So
Yeah.
We've ran a few major label projects through engineers now at this point, and so it's slowly becoming normalized to get paid immediately after the work is approved,
Yeah.
which is how I think it should be, right?
110%. 110%.
If you were creating any other product, if I were making brooms, like I would pay for all the metal, I would pay for all the whatever bristles and all the plastic and stuff up front. I wouldn't be like, you know, hey, metal company, like we're gonna pay you like after we put the brooms out.
Yeah,
You know, like,
of course.
it'd be like, well, music is like one of the only places where the product gets made and it gets paid for after it comes out, which is like just baffling.
And it doesn't make any sense as well, because especially with these major label like projects and stuff, like the budget and everything, it's all agreed beforehand. Do you know what I mean? And like these companies are huge and massive. Like I've had my own issues with them. Like Universal, the funnel of getting paid through Universal, I don't know what it's like in America, but in the UK, it is like known as a stress. And like the payment system that they have, you have to like register yourself as like a vendor. It is just the most backwards thing I've ever seen in my life. Like it's so annoying.
Sometimes the people blocking you from getting paid too, I mean, none of these people, like, the money's coming out of their paycheck. Like, these are publicly held, publicly traded, like, giant corporations. They can definitely pay my measly little mastering fee. There's other expenses and other overhead that's way more impactful than my mastering invoice, for sure.
Of course, it's a funny business, and it is really annoying, especially like. But that is what is brilliant. Just to give engineers its props. Like that is what is so brilliant about that site, and why, you know, I can't
Yeah, the
recommend it
pressing
enough.
buttons, the listening to music, the pressing buttons, the experimenting back here, that's the easy part. It's everything outside of it, the relationships, the you know, dealing with other people, that's where like the speed bumps happen.
Yeah. So
But even
you're,
that,
so as you said, you are running like a lot of projects through engineers now. And how are you finding that major labels are willing to run the projects through the site?
well, I think that's more in beta mode right now,
Mm,
but I think it's going to become probably more normalized as
right.
um, engineers kind of scales and like fine tunes some of those processes,
Yeah, yeah, and the
because there's a
relationships
lot more.
with the
Yeah,
big
there's a lot
guys.
more. Yeah, there's more that goes into it with a major label as far as like approvals and stuff. So like getting that stuff synced up is
Yeah,
kind of the problem they're
because it
solving.
is such a big machine. Like as I was saying, like with Universal, you have to be like registered as a vendor and stuff like that. And if they're doing it through the site, how do they connect those dots and like know who's done it? And you know, you're essentially putting a party person in the middle. But obviously, what
Well, I
engineers?
think engineers is going to simplify it for us a lot.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the beauty of it, for being an engineer and for being an artist. Like they're simplifying
yeah.
the connection between the engineer and artist.
And it all just being in one place, like everything is in one place, and you can even have like your portfolio and stuff like all laid there. So you have your page like social media network, and they like find the best one that fits for them, and bang, you're off.
Yeah, and if they need their files years later, which happens a lot with
Oh
labels, they
yeah.
just go right on to their page and they download the files again.
Yeah, I literally had that today. I had a client phone me up asking for files from 2017, and I was like, bro, that is a crazy ask. I'll have to. I mostly never delete files, but I don't know what hard drive it's on. Like I'm gonna have to find it. But yeah, that's cool. So I wanted to know a little bit about your process. I think I sort of know from how you've been speaking about it, but your process as a mastering engineer, are you working like solely out of the box or in the box, or are you using a combination of the two?
Yeah, I have a hybrid process. Most everything goes digital to analog, and then analog to digital again.
Okay, cool.
There's a few masters I have that are completely in the box, but those are like very rare for me, because I think I know the strengths of each like kind of separate part of my system. So it
Right.
rarely does not go through analog.
Yeah. I see some really, really interesting pieces behind you. That was one of the questions I was gonna ask you is like if you had to pick, like what are your three favorite pieces of gear that you've got in your studio? Like your top three pieces.
Well, it's so hard.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna say
I
that.
need the system. I'm a systems guy, so like the entire system like needs to be here. And I don't have that many pieces of gear. So the things that get used in pretty much everything is I love my Crookwood.
Okay.
That thing is the brain of the studio, and that's the thing, the blue and black thing that's right behind me.
Yeah.
Um, it's basically like a patch bay on steroids that allows me to like patch in any of these analog inserts in whatever order I want. And I can also like audition two chains that are completely kind of sequenced around. So if I like want to flip the sequence, I could hit the A B button on there. And remember when I talked about like doing multiple, like trying to beat myself out, like
Right.
I
Okay.
could do it in
So
analog
you can
too.
literally
So
just press a button and just, you know, like what you do with like a speaker switch or something, but with different versions of the record.
no. Like I could put the compressor behind the EQ, or like
Oh,
the
I
tubes
see.
behind
Right.
that.
Oh, just on
Like
the
I could
fly.
resequence them. Yeah, just I
Oh,
hit
wow.
B and it goes and it switches everything up in a different sequence, and so I could hear what it was like to run the compressor before the EQ or you know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
that is cool. That is
Um,
cool.
yeah, and so it's like it's an amazing piece of hardware for me. The other thing that it helps me with is like this is home base, not only for me, but a lot of the mixers that I work with. Like they want to know because the mixers move around all the time. They're mixing in different places.
Yeah.
I'm always here in the same exact studio. So they're like, I don't know if this kick is right. Can you like listen to it and tell me, you know, if it's right? And because everything on here is on switches, I rotate between two volumes and it's always the same volume every time. And so I hit one button and I go to my normal listening volume and then I go to my loud listening volume. And between those two, that's how I'm balancing every master. So I can listen to it at my listening volume and then listen to it loud. And I can immediately say like, yes, this kick needs to come up. The vocals sound buried too, you know, and know exactly what I'm hearing every single time. So that thing's great. It also has an MS codec, which allows me to turn any of my pieces of gear, analog gear, into just mid or side processing. So like say I only want to process. Yeah, it was a really cool feature.
That's crazy.
Say I just want to process, I want to leave the sides alone, but I only want to use tubes down the middle or vice versa, right? I can program it so that it only runs on the sides.
And that process works across all of your equipment.
All of my analog gear.
That is crazy.
I could even do like 2 at a time. Yeah, that's why I chose this one over the ones that were offered by like Masselec or SPL. This was the only one that was doing what it did. So I really like this one. The other things that I can't live without, I love my Golly EQs. You can see all the Golly stuff behind me. That guy is Gustav is brilliant. He's when I first got this thing, and there's stories of me saying it, and people like obviously on the internet say stupid comments beneath some of this stuff. But when I first was listening to it, I was like cranking it up, and I was like, oh man, I can't hear it. It's not doing anything. And then I hit the bypass button, and it's so gradual and so transparent that when I hit the bypass, I was like, whoa, like it like completely changed it. But it was really hard to hear because of how transparent and how gradual it was. So like
that's exactly what you're after. Do you know what I mean? Especially when you're mastering. That's
it's like so like I immediately I flipped off the switch and I immediately lost all the body that I had given it, you know. So like when I first tried to when I was first using it. So like that stuff is really great. You can't even hear it until it's off. And then you're like, oh shit, that sounded like so good what I was doing in there.
It must take a while to train your ears to gear like that. Do you know what I mean? So you can actually sort of sculpt with it being so transparent and so sort of like smooth the process, being able to like adjust, do you know what I mean? Or constantly having to like A/B the bypass, do you know what I mean? Oh, sound good. Do you know what I mean?
And one of the things about using analog gear as well is most analog gear doesn't have any metering on it. So we really have to use our ears to know when it's like being distorted in that unit. Like in actually most of these units, like they don't have, the EQs do not have any indication of like whether you're going over
you're peaking, or not.
Yep. So it's really good to when using those to listen very intently.
Yeah.
For me, and obviously being careful with the level of the signal that's being ran through it. Like that's where the sequencing of the inserts comes in. But yeah, really cool piece of gear. The other piece of gear that is right above it, right here, is my SPL tube vitalizer. I got my custom tubes in it. There's a big, like there's a whole website dedicated to shooting out tubes, and there was a few on there that were like, it was, I want to say like over 50 different tubes were shot out in that thing.
On your particular unit?
No, there's like a whole website of this one person who just shot everything out.
I see.
And there's all these files. Yeah, you could probably Google it and find it. But I ended up going with a couple different tubes like that were recommended based off this website. I don't remember which ones I picked specifically. But I put in the custom tubes, and then I put in these microphonic dampeners, which help to reduce the amount of distortion that is produced when running through the tubes. So each tube has like these little microphonic dampeners on them that like disperse heat.
Oh wow.
And give it an even cleaner sound.
So it's it's sort of tricked out. It's been like modded to put it on steroids sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yep. And then right here, I actually have the Better Maker V2 and the Better Maker V1. I love both of these units. I do prefer my Better Maker V1 on a lot of stuff. I have a feeling that it's because of the power supply.
Really?
The low end, particularly when I have done blind ABs, is just a little bit more weighty in that one. And so I have a use case for this one. This one also is used sometimes in my chain, because it does have some really cool saturation options, like with how you can dial in the coloration on the V2. It's almost like a completely separate unit. The coloration and the clipper in there are like two kind of game-changing things for my process. So
that's cool. And that's crazy that obviously you're listening so intently that you can actually hear the difference between, and you are like processing it, and you believe that it's the power supply. Like obviously, like I feel like the majority, like 99% of the population, if you were to AB the same process of what you're listening to, they wouldn't be able to hear a thing. Do you know what I mean? So like the ears are so tuned.
I might be wrong too, but I like blind A-being, like just like I press the button over and over, so I forget which one is which,
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah.
I kept choosing the V1, and it was because of the low end every time.
That's cool. What speakers are you using in the background there?
We have the Tyler Acoustic D1Xs. These are probably my favorite speakers I've ever worked on and ever heard, actually.
Really?
Because they're very transparent. Yeah. I actually use like kind of cheap cables too, and a kind of cheap amp. I upgraded to like really nice amps, and I was like sending stuff back, and I was like playing stuff back, and I'm like, man, why does it sound distorted over here? And it was because like the amps were too good. And so I wasn't hearing some of the things that were like, that it was able to handle things that other playback systems weren't. So like I like my cheap wires and my cheap amp. I prefer it over the expensive stuff, my mono blocks, because it translates better. So
that's dope.
If I can get it to sound really, really good in here, it sounds great everywhere else.
Yeah, of course. And the room like inside and out. Do you know what I mean? So that's so cool, man. So just obviously we're into the hour mark now. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but there was a few more questions that I wanted to ask.
Sure.
The first question is, and this is interesting for me because like looking at yourself and the position that you're in and the records that you're working on, like to me, it feels like you're at the top of your game, right? So what I would like to know is like where you want to find yourself in 5 years' time. Like where do you think you'll be, like in terms of your career and what you're doing in your workflow, and like what do the next 5 years look like for you?
I don't think that I'm at the top of my game. I think I'm just getting started. So it is interesting to hear like your perspective too, because there are definitely more prolific mastering engineers than myself. But for me, that's like anything. It shows me that I have work to do on myself, in my career, in my relationships. Like I'm using it as an opportunity rather than like, oh, I'm not like the most prolific mastering engineer. So I don't believe I am the most prolific. There are mastering engineers who have had much longer careers, much more streams, much more accolades. So I aspire to be like some of them, with one caveat, and the caveat is the development of other people much faster. So I do want to see my young team succeed. Um, Growing up, idolizing engineers and mastering engineers, specifically when I was younger. I saw a lot of the same thing. It was an old, white, bald
Yeah.
male with glasses,
Yeah.
and I don't even have to like say anything else, and that fits the description of at least 10 mastering engineers. And that's okay. Like, it's okay, because we're all different, and like they can't choose how they look and that
No.
kind of stuff. But it would be nice to have younger, different looking people that represented kind of the music that they worked on. And so that's like my intention. I'm very intentional with um, who's on my team, and then how they're being developed. So I would like to have a team of engineers. I don't need like a bunch of credits and accolades. Like, I want to be impactful in other people's lives and help them, up out of whatever situations that they're
Yeah.
in, if they have the work ethic, the skill, and basically if they have the work ethic, because like the
Yeah.
skill can be taught. So right now we have Demetrius and Kayla, who are both amazingly hard workers, and just like just off, like without any training, just like they catch on really fast. So with that, um, they've begun to develop, and like Demetrius this last year started to do some like major label projects, which is really cool, and a really like, for me,
Amazing.
it's a big milestone, because some of this work is like, okay, do I intake the work and get the streams and accolade? Do I like do it for myself, or is this person capable of doing it at this level, at the $1 million snare standard of quality, and they get the praise and the accolades, and
Yeah.
obviously the payment for that. And so for me, it's like, it's finding a balance, where it's
Yeah.
like, maybe I forego some money for myself, in return I change people's lives. So that's
Yeah.
a big thing.
And
And then as
building
well,
like
like,
like a building like a brand and a company that is, allowing people to grow up within it. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's such a, again,
yeah,
like, it only leads back to like your integrity as a person, and it's a brilliant way of like growing and building your own company. And I feel like those, handing out those successes, as history shows, it always ends up coming back to you anyway. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, I find a lot of purpose in um helping other people, and like, even if it, like, even especially our clients, like, if I
Yeah.
could do stuff to like help in any way, like even outside of the mastering, because like they obviously expect me to go in on the mastering. Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like baseline. Like, I'm going to go in on the mastering. But then beyond that, like, if I could do anything for them, like within my power, I don't have a ton of power to do stuff outside, but if I can in any way, like, that's what
Yeah.
I aspire to do. And then, uh, like I said, we're not trying to be like, we're not trying to preserve the classic thing. So I don't know what's on the horizon. The one thing I do want to continue to do is keep an open mind, um, as to what $1 million snare can evolve into. Like, is it, um, eventually a software company? Is it eventually like a hardware company? Who knows? But
Yeah.
I'm open minded to like having it evolve over time
Or both.
with
You
the
can do it.
times.
You can do. You can do whatever you want with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's so cool, man. I really. That is that's such a nice way of answering that question. That's nice. And this next question actually sort of like leads into this, and I feel like you're going to have something interesting to say. My sort of like last question I'll ask on the show is, what advice would you give to the younger generation, or, you know, engineers that have decided at any age that they want to move into the mastering side of things and learn the craft, and, you know, hopefully one day get up to a level and be doing work on at your own level? Like, what advice would you give them?
I'd probably, I'm thinking if I were talking to myself, I would say there's going to be a lot of gatekeepers, and there's going to be a lot of people. For me, there were a lot of gatekeepers. There were a lot of people who told me no. There were a lot of, you know, family and relatives who said, "Oh, you better have a plan B."
Yeah.
And it's good to acknowledge all of that stuff, because I feel like if they hadn't told me that stuff, I wouldn't be doing this today. If they had like 100% believed in me, like I might not be doing what I'm doing today. So like with everything, like we could take anything that's seemingly negative and turn it positive. And at the same time, I would also tell myself, like, everything takes time.
Yeah.
There's nothing monumental that happens on this planet um, that doesn't take a lot of time. So I would have wished that some of this stuff happened sooner for me, but it's, what for me was very much about developing myself day in and day out consistently over a lot of years.
Yeah.
And like behind the scenes, like I used to work for Target. This is kind of well known. I used to work for Target. I promoted at Target 7 times. I went from a, you know, minimum wage, like backroom employee, to I eventually worked at a much higher profile job. And like the last job that I did was the job that was like paying for all this stuff.
Right.
You know, so by like developing myself in parallel to my music career, I was able to like take all this money and like put it back into the music
Yeah.
career.
But you never lost sight of the passion, though, you know, and like
I never lost sight of it, because I was never doing it for, I was never doing this for money. I was doing it because I love to do it.
Yeah.
And then it got to a point where it's like, okay, well, I could, like, now it's like paying for me to do it full time, because there's so much, like, people want me to do this, you know, people are paying me to do this. They want me to do it.
Yeah. So it doesn't feel like a job. You just ended up doing what you always loved. Do you know what I mean? And now it
doesn't feel like a job when I'm pressing buttons.
Mastering,
but everything outside of that, the business management aspect of running a business feels like a job.
Yeah, there's always elements to it, you know, and everyone has strengths and weaknesses and stuff. Do you know what I mean? In terms of that, like, of the whole package. And, you know, as I always say on this show, you know, engineers are much more than just engineers. Like, we are business owners, small business owners. We have to do branding. We have to do accounting, marketing, everything. Do you know what I mean? And so there's a lot of hats that we have to wear, and, you know, we got to get sort of good at all of them until we can get to the point where we may be able to distribute that and give it to other people. Do you know what I mean? And then hopefully more companies like engineers come along and can take the weight off the shoulders a bit. Do you know what I mean? So, but that's so cool, man. And as I said again, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And
yeah, thanks for having me
and showing us around the studio and answering some of my questions. And next time I'm in LA, we'll definitely have to link up and maybe do a part 2 in person or something like that. And
I'm in Northern California, so I'm like 8 hours away from
LA. Well, I mean, when one of the NAMs is happening or something like that,
yeah,
link something up. Do you know what I mean? And make something happen. But where are you based then in Northern California?
I'm near Sacramento.
Oh, okay, cool, awesome, fair enough, nice. All right then. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. All of The $1 Million Snare website and Instagram page and all that stuff will all be linked below. Any other links that you want linked in, we'll add them there as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Safe.